Alright guys, today we're going to be covering section 7.3 and 7.4, which will be about ratios, proportions, and percent. So our first blank here is a ratio is a quotient of two quantities, or to two quantities. So if you remember, a quotient is the answer to a division problem. Okay, so here's a few ways we can write ratios. You may have seen them like this, A to B. We can write it as A to B. Or we can write it as A divided by B, which is the way we're going to be writing it today, as a quotient. If you remember, a fraction is like a division problem, so that's how it will be a quotient. So the first part says, write each ratio in fractional notation in simplest form. So that just means write it as a fraction and make sure it's simplified. So number one, of a ratio of 20 to 30. I'm going to come over here in this empty space. So I'm going to write it as 20 over 30. And that's not in simplest form because we know they both can be divided by 10, or you can just cross out these zeros. That simplifies to 2/3. So number one, simplified, is a ratio of 2 to 3. Number two, $30 to $65. So we're going to do the same thing, $30 over $65. Okay, and that's not in simplest form because they both can be divided by 5. So if we divide these by 5, 30 divided by 5 is $6, and 65 divided by 5, if you want to use your calculator, is $13. 6/13 cannot be simplified any further. So just make sure on that one that we have the dollar sign with our answer. So number two, I'm sorry, I should have made this bigger, $6 to $13. Squeeze that in there. Okay, and the last one, 16 days to 10 days. I'm going to come over here in this empty spot. 16 to 10. Now notice that's an improper fraction, but we've talked about before that's okay. That can happen in real life, that the top is bigger than the bottom. These both can be divided by 2, so that simplifies to 8/5. So we're going to write this as 8 to 5 days. Okay, so we wrote each ratio in fractional notation and we wrote it in simplest form. The next thing we're going to talk about is what's called a proportion. A proportion is a statement that two ratios are equal. So for example, if I say a ratio 5 over 6 equals 10 over 12, that is a proportion, and we can read that as 5 is to 6 as 10 is to 12. The next thing we're going to learn is how to solve proportions. So when we have two ratios set equal to each other and we have a variable such as x, we can solve it. So it says set cross products equal to each other, then solve the resulting equation. And by cross products, I mean we're simply going to go across and multiply, okay? So if I do this one first, 4 times 5 is 20. I'm going to set that equal to the other cross product, which is 6 times 3x. 6 times 3x gives me 18x. To solve this, we want to get x by itself, so that means divide both sides by 18. These 18s cancel out to just x. Now 20/18 is the right answer, but it's not in simplest form. 20 does not divide by 18 evenly, so what we're going to do is just simplify it. So divide these both by 2. I'm going to come up here to simplify my answer. 20 divided by 2 is 10. 18 divided by 2 is 9. 10/9 is in simplest form. So I've solved the proportion. I'm saying x is 10/9. So that means if I went in here and put that in there and multiplied, these two ratios would be equivalent. Okay, let's do number 2. Again, we're going to do cross products. So I have to do 5 times x minus 2. Set that equal to the other cross product. X times 4, we write that as 4x. So on this side, I need to use the distributive property. 5 times x is 5x. 5 times negative 2 is negative 10. It still equals 4x. Now, I have x's on both sides. I want to get them on the same side. So I'm going to, now you can move either one. In this case, I think I'm going to subtract 5x from both sides. Okay, and I'm going to come up here at the top. So these 5x cancel each other out. We're left with negative 10 on the left equals 4x minus 5x is negative 1x. To finish, divide both sides by negative 1. So negative 10 divided by negative 1, that gives a positive result of 10. So x equals 10. Those are proportions. We learned how to solve them. The next thing we're going to talk about is percent. Percent means per 100. And think about cent. We have 100 cents in a dollar. Okay, so percent per 100. This symbol is the percent symbol, and that is used to denote percent. So if we look at this diagram down here, there's 100 blocks in here. If 48 out of the 100 are shaded, we would say 48% are shaded. Writing that as a fraction, we would say 48 out of 100 are shaded, and that is the same thing as 48%. Let's go to the next page. We're going to do a few things with percents. So the first line says, Jason made 63 free throws out of 100 shots. What percentage of free throws did he make? Okay, well again, we can write that as 63 out of 100, and anytime something's out of 100, we know that's the percentage. So we would simply write this as 63%. So we're saying he would make 63 per 100 shots. Okay, next we're going to write each percent as a decimal. So there's actually two ways you can do this. You can replace the percent symbol with 0.01, which we read as 100th, or then multiply, or move the decimal 2 places to the, do you know? 2 places to the left. Okay, so if I do the first one, for example, it says drop the percentage sign, so 32 times, can you see that? Let me turn this off. 32 times 0.01. It tells me 0.32. Okay, and if I did the decimal way, if I had the number 32, the decimal right now is at the end. If I move it 2 places to the left, it ends up in the same spot. Another way to think about this, it makes it a lot easier, is if I think about a dollar. So a dollar is 100 pennies, right? So 32% is like saying I have 32 pennies, and that's how I would write 32 if I had 32 cents. Okay, the same thing on 143%. Well, 100% is a dollar. So 143% has to be $1.43. Again, I'm going to move the decimal 2 places to the left. So here's a decimal at the end, 1, 2. That gives me 1.43, which again would be like $1.43. Now on 5.7%, I'm going to move the decimal 2 places to the left. What we're going to do in the empty spot is put a 0. So I'm going to write this as 0.057. Now think about this. 5.7% of a dollar, that's like 5 cents, almost 6 cents. So that's why it's 0.05. It's not 50 cents, it's 5 cents and a little extra. So again, I like to move the decimal way. Of course, you can always do the multiply by 0.01, either way. But don't get so much caught up on the rules, because like I said, I just relate it to money, and that helps me really make sense of it a lot easier, thinking about pennies and stuff like that. Now we're going to do the opposite. We're going to write each decimal as a percent. So on this one, we can multiply by 100%, or we can move the decimal 2 places, this time to the right. Okay, so if I have 78 cents, that's 78 out of 100. So that's the same thing as 78%. But if we follow the rules, move the decimal 2 places to the right, and there we are at the end. We don't need the decimal right here at the end. 4.6, move it 2 places to the right. So we have a 0 at the end. So this is the same as 460%. So think of this as $4.60. Okay, $1 is 100%, so that is 460%. 0.081, move it 2 places to the right, 1, 2, so it's in between the 8 and the 1. We don't need those zeros at the front, so just write it as 8.1%. So think about that as like 8 pennies. That's about 8% of a dollar. All right, the next skill we're going to do is we're going to write each percent as a fraction or mixed number, and of course it always has to be in simplest form. So let's talk about how to do this. So if number 1 is 15%, remember that percent symbol means out of 100, so 15% is the same thing as if I write 15 over 100. So I wrote it as a fraction, but I need to simplify it. Those both can be divided by 5 divide by 5, divide by 5. 15 divided by 5 is 3. 100 divided by 5 is 20. So 3/20 is 15% in simplest form. Now this one with 9.2%, I'm going to do the same first step. I'm going to write 9.2, that's out of 100. The problem is we don't want a decimal up here. So what I can do to get rid of this decimal is move it one place to the right or multiply by 10. But I have to do the same thing on the bottom. So this now is going to become 92 over 1,000. 92 over 1,000. Okay, we need to simplify that. Let's do 92 divided by 2. That's 46. I'm going to keep squeezing over here. 1,000 divided by 2 is 500. Okay, I can divide these again. Divided by 2, 23. 500 divided by 2 is 250. And then we can't go any further because 23 is a prime number. Okay, so when you have a decimal one, we don't want decimals in the numerator. So by multiplying by 10, I can move the decimal over. But just remember, if you do it to the top, you have to do it to the bottom to keep it equivalent. So I changed the 100 to 1,000 and the 9.2 to 92. All right, 275%. I'm gonna squeeze this in here. 275 over 100. So right away we can see this is improper, but the directions say to write it as a mixed number, okay? So what we can go ahead and do is the numerator, 275 divided by 100. Now you can simplify it first and then do this. It's kind of just up to you, either way. 100 will go into 275 2 times. 2 times 100 is 200. We have 75 left over. So I would write this as 2 and 75 hundredths. I really need to make more room on here. Okay, so we have 2 as our whole number, but 75 hundredths will simplify to 3/4. So our final answer is 2 and 3/4. So think about how that makes sense, if you will. 275 is like $2.75. So that's like you have $2.75. Okay, 2 3/4. All right, next we're going to write each fraction or mixed number now as a percent. So first, to get it to a percent, we want to turn it into a decimal. Divide the numerator by denominator to turn it into a decimal, then move the decimal 2 places to the right. Okay, so 23 over 50. We're going to take our calculator and type in 23 divided by 50. We get 0.46. Now you can't just throw a percentage sign on the end of that because that's not what the percentage is right now. To be a percentage, we move it 2 places to the right, and that becomes 46%. Okay, so think about why that makes sense. 25 would be half of 50, so 23 is a little bit less than half. Okay, let's do 7/12. So if you want to visualize it like that, 7 divided by 12, type it in your calculator. Okay, notice here we have 0.58 and then a repeating 3. So let me show you what we're going to do with that. 0.58, 3, 3, 3. Just write a couple for right now. Move it 2 places to the right. So it's 58.3, but if we just leave it like that, that's not true. To note a repeating decimal, we put this line over it. And that tells the reader that this 3 repeats on continuously. So 58.3 repeating percent. Now on the last one, 4 2/5, this one is a mixed number. So we can't just do 2 divided by 5, that's not going to work out. So what we're going to do first is change it to an improper fraction. 4 times 5 is 20, plus 2 is 22. So this is the same as 22/5. Okay, now I can go to my calculator and do 22 divided by 5, and that gives me 4.4. Okay, but I'm not going to circle that, right? Because right now that's just a decimal. To make it a percentage, I need to move it 2 places to the right. 1, 2, put a 0 in the empty spot. So I'm going to clean this up and write it as 440%. Okay, last page. The last thing we're going to do now is we're going to be solving percent problems, but we're going to do it 2 different ways, okay? And I want you to know that either way will work. It's just I want to teach you both ways so that you can kind of decide which one you prefer. So the first way, we're going to solve percent problems with equations. So basically, we're going to take these words and translate them into an equation, okay? So when it says what number, that means we don't know what it is. So what number, we're going to use a variable, and I'm just going to always use x. What number is the equal sign, 8% of is multiplication, 50. Now the problem right here is we can't really use 8% like it is right now, and this is why we learned how to change it into a decimal. So instead of writing it like this, we're going to write it as x equals 8% as a decimal would be 0.08 times 50. Okay, x is already by itself over here, so all I have to do on my calculator is multiply 0.08 times 50, which gives us 4. So x equals 4. On the next one, 45 is what percent of 60? So I just take it piece by piece. They gave me 45. The word is translates to equals. What percent? I don't know, so I put an x. Of is multiplication, and then the 60 is like that. So another way to write this is 45 equals, instead of x times 60, we can write it as 60 times x. To get x by itself, divide both sides by 60. So I'm left with 45 divided by 60. Type that in your calculator. 0.75. Now we have to be careful on this one because on number 1 it just says what number. So our answer was a number. But on number 2 it said what percent. So that means our answer has to be in percentage form. So if you have 75 hundredths, move it 2 places to the right. It's 75% is our answer. Number 3, 70% of what number is 35? So again, when we have a percentage in here, go ahead and write it as a decimal. So 70% would be 0.70 of multiplication. What number? I don't know, so I'm going to put x. Is equals, and then 35. So on this one, again, you can write it condensed, so 0.70x equals 35. And then we're going to divide both sides by 0.70. Those cancel. X equals, so on your calculator, do 35 divided by 0.70. X equals 50. Okay, so that's one way to solve percent problems by using equations. The last thing we're going to learn is how to solve percent problems by using proportions, which is what we learned about earlier. Okay, so when we're doing the proportions, whenever you see the percentage, like on number 1, 30%, that's always going to be over the number 100. Okay, because 30% is the same thing as writing 30 over 100. So 30% of 350 is what number? So this is my first ratio, okay, of 350, so that's my amount, or that's my base, I should say, sorry. So out of 350, what number? What number? I can put x or any variable you want. So 30% became 30 over 100. 30% of this number is what? That's how I know to put the x on top. So remember, we're going to use cross products. So 100 times x is 100x equals, and then we're going to do 350 times 30, which is 10,500. Divide both sides by 100. X equals 105. And on each of these, I'm just really careful because this one said what number, so my answer was a number. But on number 2, it says what percent. So we have to make sure at the end our answer is in percentage form. What percent of 120 is 96? Okay, so we don't know the percent, but we know the percent is always out of 100, so we put an x here. What percent, x over 100, is What percent of 120 is 96? So anytime the number that follows the word of, that's going to be your denominator, because this is out of the total amount, okay? Is 96. So I want to know what percent 96 is out of 120. Like say if I made a 96 out of 120 points on a test, and I wanted to know what my grade was. Okay, let's do cross products. 120 times x equals 96 times 100 is 9600. Divide both sides by 120. X equals 9600 divided by 20, 480. Okay, but remember at the beginning, it said what percent. Okay, I'm trying to figure out what I did wrong. What percent of 120 is 96? Would be 400. Did I miss a number here? Oh, I did. That's what happened. 9600 divided by 120. I missed the 1 there. Okay, there we go. See, I knew something was wrong. You probably saw it on my calculator before I did. Because I knew the answer couldn't be 480%. That'd be way too big. That's bigger than 100. So that's how I knew I made a mistake. 9600 divided by 120 is 80. Now on this one, the advantage of proportions is since this was already over 100, the answer you get is already in percentage form because I'm saying it's 80 out of 100, which is the same thing as 80%. Whereas on the equation one we did up here on number 2, we had to move the decimal. So that's why some people like proportions better, because when you set it up this way, it will already be in percentage form when you need it. But again, it'll be up to you. All right, last one. 84 is 60% of what number? Okay, 84 is something. I know that 60% has to be 60 over 100 of what number? So I don't know. 84 is something of a number. I don't know what the larger number is. Okay, let's do cross products. 60 times x is 60x. 84 times 100 is 8400. Then divide both sides by 60. X equals, make sure I type it in right this time, 140. So we're saying 84 out of 140 is the same thing as if you had 60% of that amount. Okay, x equals 140, and that is how you solve percent problems.